Greetings, Gilliam the Rogue here, once again back with a PTS feedback video. I know we have very little time before Monday's patch comes live, but there is a little bit more time in between here and console release, so hopefully this information gets out there, people get a hold of it, understand how these item sets are changing, the importance of them, and maybe ZeniMax balance tweaks them a little bit. But today, we are going to be investigating Magicka damage-dealing weapons that augment your weapon attacks. So, the staves, primarily, because that's what magic dealers use in Elder Scrolls Online primarily. So, we'll be looking at the Master, Maelstrom, and Asylum staves with a little bit of parameters so that we keep variables consistent. So, I'll be playing on a Magicka Nightblade. Now, you could play on a Magicka Sword to get things a little bit more consistent because a lot of these skills we will be using anyways, but I'm more familiar with the Magicka Nightblade. I don't want to change up Magicka Sword because their bar space allocation is very pigeonholed into having set up stuff, and if I change stuff for target dummies, it kind of removes the importance because it's like, I would never have this bar set up anyways because I can't, or it's a DPS loss, or whatever it is. So, since I have a little bit more freedom on my Magicka Nightblade in terms of bar space, because I don't have so many things that I need to double bar, it makes more sense to do it here. And these, while some of them might be a DPS deficit in some areas, still post relatively decent numbers, and we can get an idea of what these staves are bringing to the table. And again, we can talk about in between what classes these might fit better on or might not fit well at all on. So, I guess let's talk about our parameters in terms of keeping things static. So we want to have a primary test where we don't change anything. That's called a control. So what we're trying to get from a baseline. So in all of these tests, my gear will be gold. I'll be running the same enchants, yada, yada, yada. There might be a few trait changes and one enchant change on our weapon primarily, but I'll explain why that happens when we get there. There's some interesting variables that will change with some of these weapons in terms of what they're augmenting or bringing us to the table. And if we kept variables the same in terms of a trait, then we'd be removing some of that impact that that weapon brings, because its purpose is to alleviate some of the trait changes or the traits that we must use. So let's talk about those parameters. So we'll be running 5-piece Julianos on our body, all light, all Magicka enchanted, all divines, and gold. And then we'll be running 2-piece Grothar, 1 heavy, 1 medium to enable that 5-1-1 bonus with the Undaunted skills, both Magicka, both divines. We'll be running the Lover this time. Ideally, we would have the Apprentice because that's going to fit better in a group situation. But since I'm not at penetration camp because I'm running off balance setup, because we're going to keep that consistent as well, I just decided, hey, let's throw on Lover and be almost at pen cap. I believe we're at 17.9k. Pen cap is at 18.5 or 18.2, depending on if the target is resistant or not. Since we're dealing with target dummies, they can never be resistant except the Centurions, which are resistant to poison damage. That's not important here. So we're 300 off the penetration cap, so we're missing very, very little damage. Not really worth talking about. And then we'll be running 4-piece Moondancer in our static test, so keeping variables consistent. And the next one, we'll be adding a Maelstrom staff to our back bar, seeing how much that brings to our table. And then, from then on, we will be keeping the Maelstrom staff on our back bar permanently, because we're going to notice that, hey, this is a really important thing to keep no matter what. Nothing's really changing. Maelstrom staves, still amazing, still great. Don't sweat it if you got one and you're like, oh no, the meta is changing, what do I do? Because it'll still be fine. So, in terms of traits on our weapons, on our front bar, we will almost always be running a charged shock enchant. That's because I want to proc concussed as much as possible, and that's going to help my shock enchant instead of having a 20% chance to proc, which goes to 40% with my elemental staff expert passive. With charge, that'll go to 84% chance to proc. So that's really, really strong for us. And then with Force Pulse, we'll also have an additional chance to proc it. So pretty much concuss is going to be up 100% of the time, which means in turn, as long as I have my elemental blockade down with this lightning staff, off balance should be up near 100% until I start heavy attacking. So that should give an idea. Again, we're on a Magicka Nightblade. Sustain is going to be a little bit easier for us. On our back bar, we're running Nirnhoned with weapon damage, the Berserker enchant. Now, This is not ideal for everyone. Back bar traits are highly different based on what class you're playing because what kind of bar setup you're having. So if you have a lot of dots on your back bar, Nirnhode is better because those dots will get the Nirnhode buff even after you swap off. Meanwhile, other classes that have their dots front bar will primarily like infused on their back bar with that Berserker enchant, because then you can proc that Berserker enchant on your back bar, swap to your front bar, have that huge power spike of the Berserker infused, and then get those dots to go. And even when your infused Berserker enchant fails, if those dots are still running, they'll still be checking, hey, he casted this with that infused Berserker enchant, I'm still going to do that much damage. So, for a Nightblade, since all of our single target dots, which is pretty much just Cripple or Destro Clench, depending on which one we'll be using, are on our back bar, we take Nirnhode. But something like a Dragonite, who has all of his single target skills on his front bar, he's going to prefer Infused. So, that can kind of help give an idea in terms of what trait you want on your back bar and what sort of situations. Nirnhode has more AoE damage, all that good stuff. So I'll be running Nirnhode on my back bar throughout the entire thing, regardless of what staff I'm using. And then on my front bar, again, charge with a Shock Enchant. And then when we get to our Asylum staff, I will actually be using an infused Flame Enchant. And the reason that is because I will be guaranteed to apply Concussed already with every 2 Force Shocks. So there's no reason for me to run charged. I will get more burning up time with that, but that's why I have an infused Flame Enchant here, because that infused will allow my Flame Enchant to go off more frequently, which will in turn give my burning a higher uptime because it'll have more chances to proc. So those are our consistent variables, and then we'll also be doing one with the Master Staff, again, charged Shock Enchant. The thing that we will change with this is one ability on our back bar. Instead of running Cripple, we will have to run Destructive Clench. That's going to have a big detriment. We'll talk about it when we get there, but that we have that covered, let's take a peek at CP. Green Tree, I'm running as much regen as possible, so I have to do as little heavy attacking. Again, not ideal. Since we're target dummy cheesing, we want to keep things consistent, so I don't have as many consistent or corrupting variables. I'll talk about them when I get there. But in a real situation, these would only be about 46, maybe 49, or 43 or 49, depending on how much you like. And then you'd have way more put into Warlord, Sprinter, and Tumbling, and Shadow Ward. But since we don't have to deal with mechanics, we don't have to worry about that. In the blue tree, we have 41 Erosion, 37 Elfborn, 37 Elemental Expert, 40 Master at Arms, and 75 Thaumaturge. This is the ideal setup for a Magicka Nightblade if they're using the off-balance setup and they are running a Lightning Staff backbar themselves. This will change up a little bit in group settings because you don't need nearly as much spell penetration because sets like Alkosh, Minor Breach, etc., etc., and in turn you can buff up your Elemental Expert. You'll cap that at about 49, and then Elfborn will go up to about 40, maybe 43 or so, depending on jump points, etc. But yeah, that gives an idea. And then in the red tree, doesn't matter, running a really static setup that I always run on all my DPS tunes, 49 Hardy and Alley Defender, 61 Thick-Skinned and Ironclad, and 10 Quick Recovery. This is not important, but hey, gives you an idea. And then for consumables, we'll be using Witch Mother's Brew because I want to do as little heavy attacking as possible, and then I'll also be drinking potions off cooldown. So that was a lot of parameters, but now you have an idea in terms of what we'll be doing. So now we'll look at our bars. So on my Flame Staff front bar, I have Impale, Force Pulse, Siphoning Attacks to make sure I get loads of regen, and my Siphoning passive on my front bar. Merciless Resolve, Inner Light, Shooting Star to get more Magicka, and since we're doing a 6 million target dummy instead of a 3 million, we want to have we'll get more DPS out of Shooting Star over a longer fight if it's pure single target. You could use Destro Ultimate. It's going to be a DPS loss in single target, but it'll be better if you're fighting ads, etc. It doesn't matter. And then in our back bar, for the non-Master Staff rotation, we'll be running Blockade of Storms, Crippling Grasp. In the Maelstrom Staff rotation, this will become Destro Clench. Then we'll be running Twisting Path, LE Drain, Inner Light, and Soul Harvest to make sure that we get that Assassination passive back bar. Now, so let's talk about a debriefer in terms of why the Master Inferno Staff is going to suck so much. And that's because I'm going to have to change up my bars considerably. I'm going to have to run Destro Clench on my front bar, and then I'm going to have Cripple somewhere, or I'm going to have to move Siphoning Attacks to my back bar. But that means I'm going to lose 8% max Magicka, and there's no real effective way I can get that back unless I run Funnel Health, but that's going to change up the order of importance in terms of burning, concussed, etc. So we're going to have to talk about that when we get there a little bit more. But so we're going to do, again, the baseline test first, so you have everything there. If you're confused about anything I said, just go back in the video. Again, I'm going to edit through parses because there's going to be a lot of parsing. If I make a mistake, I'm going to have to re-record, go through it, chop it out, get the values, and then we'll talk about the parse at the end, talk about if crit values being too high, too low, the implications those bring, if I made mistakes during the parse, yada, yada, yada. So similarly to the stamina parsing as well, I'm going to drink a potion, and I'm going to make sure I have my ultimate before I pull every time, and then I'm going to let my potion get down to about 25 seconds remaining so that I can chug it at the beginning when I'm starting to feel a little bit of that resource management issue so that I can prolong having the heavy attack. Okay, so there was the parse with the baseline. So we got 35k with that, literally, what is that? 22 DPS away from 35k, and that's without a Maelstrom staff. So let's look through these buffs really quick. Siphoning attacks up 84%, Minor Berserk up 94%. Our highest damage dealing ability was Twisting Path. That's because we're using a lightning staff, so since that gets that 8% amp, it's super strong. Merciless Resolve coming in at a number 2. Our light attacks combined did about... That was actually our highest damage dealing, was when we combine our shock and fire light attacks. It's about 13 over actually 14%, so that's really, really strong. Very important to weave on a Nightblade. That's never going to change with Merciless. So let's look through these values. My highest crit chance is 53.6, so if any time I have more or less than 3%, that's going to be considered a corrupting variable. So Twisting Path is a little bit higher, Assassin's Will is a little bit lower, so that kind of equalizes. Blockade is a little bit higher, Light Attacks is good, Cripple is good, Shooting Star low, Impale is meh, Light Attack is meh. So pretty... It's a little bit above below. So every time we have one above, we have one below. So it's kind of equalizing in terms of chance, whatever you want to talk about, or however you want to say it. So... yeah, highest crit was 75% with 4 hits. That's not really worth talking about. So pretty static, pretty decent. Off balance up 90%. That's exactly what I said. It was going to be up really, really high. I did have to do a few heavy attacks in here. We can look. I got 5 off during the entire thing. Magicka Steel up kind of Crippling Grasp not up perfectly because it doesn't fit into our rotation well. Minor Vulnerability only up 70%. Now the reason that off balance lasts longer is because vulnerability lasts 4 seconds, off balance lasts 4 seconds after it applies. So in effectiveness, it lasts 8 seconds of off balance. So that is one major advantage. And then if you proc vulnerability again when your Wall of Elements is going, then you have a 12-second duration because Wall of Elements lasts 8 seconds, and anytime something is sitting in it, it sets them off balance for 4, so 8 plus 4 is 12. So you have that 12-second duration of blockade if you get 2 vulnerability procs during it and you do no heavy attacking. If you consume the heavy attack and Wall of Elements is no longer dealing damage, then you will not get the off balance. I'll have a future video discussing off balance and how it exactly works in terms of interacting with the game, but relatively decent. Look at here again, our charged weapon doing about 1k DPS, burning doing 1.0, almost 1.1k, so pretty decent. Now we'll be going on to our Maelstrom staff parse. So we're going to put, instead of running Moondancer back bar, we'll have a Nirnhoned lightning staff back bar. Again, I need to make sure that I have enough ultimate for this, so I'm going to build that up, and then I'll just cut through the parse after I'm done. Okay, so there was the Maelstrom staff parse. We see a considerable damage boost out of that one. We went from, again, almost 35k to breaking 38k. So pretty much we're actually gaining, yeah, 3k DPS, a little bit over 3k DPS from the Maelstrom staff alone. So that is super important in terms of what that's enabling. So again, remember our light attacks with Flame did 3,100, and then our light attacks with Lightning did 1,800, and then we're jumping to 4,800 with Fire and 2,700 with Lightning. So that's a huge power spike out of that Maelstrom staff on our back bar. Regardless of what trait it is, it's just super strong to have. So let's look through some of these crits. We got a really lucky parse, so some of that will be due to variability. So 64% light attack, or 65%, 64% Assassin's Will. Then we get into line, very in line with Blockade and Path, a little bit too strong with Cripple, or with Impale. Cripple was good, our Lightning Light attacks were weak, Shooting Star was weak, Force Pulse pretty weak, Burning really strong, and then another 75% with Shooting Star. So yeah, some of these are a little bit lower, but a lot of them are a little bit high. So probably about 2800 DPS enabling from that Lightning Staff, or from the Maelstrom Staff, because there was a lot of crit RNG in this, in our favor with this one. So we're going to chalk this one up to being super lucky with some of these, giving us about 300, maybe 500 extra DPS than we should be getting due to that volatility. So do keep that in mind. So this would probably be about 70 or 37.8k, maybe 37.5k in terms of what this is enabling, but still a very big power spike out of that, still super important. Now we are going to look at the Maelstrom or the Master Staff. So again, with this, now I'm going to have to run Destro Clench on this bar in order to make a use out of it. So I'm going to put that where my Siphoning attacks is, and then I'm going to put that on my back bar where Cripple is, because that's pretty much just going to take its place. And the reason why we can't run this on our back bar is because we're going to run that Maelstrom Staff on our front bar. So it's not going to really work out. So pretty much we're just going to lose 8% max Magicka. We went from about 30 or 43k to about 41k. So that's a pretty big power loss due to this. So that's going to be a really big issue for Magicka Nightblade primarily. It'll be a little bit better on Sorc or Templar because they have that bar space. They don't have to worry about losing a special ability to slot. Like Adric Spear abilities will be on both bars because you'll have Spear Shards on one and then Jabs on the other for the Templar, and then the Sorc already double bars Aegis, and that's their form of 8%. So they don't really have to worry about these issues. So on a Magicka Sorc or Templar, the Master Destro Staff will be a tiny bit better, but we're going to look and see what this damage production is like, and we're going to see that it's in a really iffy spot. So again, I'm going to generate ultimate during this time, and then once I pull, I'll cut that out and all of that good stuff, and then we'll talk about the parse, more corrupting variables, and then talking about kind of why the Master Destro Staff is going to be so garbage, because spoilers, it is. It's in a really bad spot at the moment, and there's some big reasons. So we'll look at the tooltip and talk a little bit about why that is a big issue once we get there. Okay, so there was the parse. We got 35k with this one. Now, keep in mind, I did keep that Maelstrom Staff on my back bar. So remember to subtract about 2,700, maybe 2,500 DPS from this parse in terms of what that is enabling. So when we do that, that comes out to about 33,500 about. So yeah, it's in a pretty meh spot at the moment, or 32,500, sorry, basic math, can't think. So it's weaker than having no staff at all. So when we compared that 35k earlier, I just barely broke 35k, but that was with a Maelstrom Staff. So if I took off that Maelstrom Staff, we'd be at a DPS deficit. And again, that is primarily because as a Nightblade, we lose so much power from that, and there's no really good way that we can give that up unless we ran Funnel Health. So I will do another parse with Funnel Health just for this one, but keep in mind that I am going to be losing a tremendous amount of damage because I won't be proccing Concussed as much, because that Force Pulse is giving me, with the charge, it's giving me like a 64% chance to proc Burning, Concussed, and Minor Maim every Force Pulse, even without an Asylum Staff. So that charge trait is really strong in terms of what it brings to the table for a solo player, or even some 4-man groups. So it's really strong, and by giving up that extra like 44% chance to proc, it's going to really hurt my DPS. But again, I can change that up because I need to get that Magicka back. So with that passive, again, I'm at about almost 44k. So I will be losing that damage from Force Pulse's raw damage and that Burning, Concussed, etc. But I will be gaining damage here. So again, we'll go through this parse and see what it looks like. Okay, so when we see that I do get that Magicka back, the damage deficit is not as large as it was before. So again, I did keep that Maelstrom staff on, but this time I did 36.7k. So we're gaining about 1700 DPS from Flame Clench, because that direct damage portion that it's doing is actually out DPSing the damage over time function. That's how awful Flame Clench and just Clench is in general as a damage over time. The damage over time did 1300 DPS. Granted, it had a 47% crit chance, so it was a little bit lower than it should be, and Flame Clench had a way higher crit chance than it should have been, but that's pretty sad that the direct damage of this ability is beating the damage over time function. But when we add them up together, they're just barely doing 2700 DPS. And when we compare that to Cripple in earlier parses, when we look at some of those, Crippling Grasp did 2900 on the dot alone, and then Jesus, sorry, speech impediment. Then the direct damage hit did about 500 DPS. So in every way, shape, and form, Crippling Grasp is better. Expedition, passive Magicka, more DPS, snares and immobilizes. Like, compared to Clench, which is just knockback, it does give you your Ancient Knowledge passive if you do need it slotted, but it's a big DPS detriment. And Magicka Sustain with the staff is very, very nice, actually, because that 30% cost reduction goes a super long way. We're at 2200 with the staff. We compare that to Crippling Grasp, it's about 700 Magicka cheaper. But when we look at Destro Clench without the staff on, let's take that off really quick and swap to a different bar. When we look at it, it's 3400. Let's just put that on my bar. Yeah, 3422. So that's a disgusting amount of Magicka. I really wish the base cost of this tooltip, that 30% cost reduction, just went to the base tooltip, or to the base skill. Like, put 20% cost reduction on the skill itself alone, and then give 10% to the staff, so the staff still feels better, but it's not as much of a DPS detriment to use the ability. That, and please increase the damage over time function of Clench. It is in some dire needing of love. And when you do that, you're also going to bring the floor between, or the difference between Magicka and Stamina DPS. Why does Stamina DPS do so much better single target than Magicka? Because they have more dots. Poison Injection, Endless Hail, and Wall of Elements counteract one another, but there's no equivalent to Poison Injection. And then you add in Rending Slashes, there's no equivalent to that. Then you add in Blade Cloak, there's no equivalent to that. Unless that class has something like a Sork, they might have a little bit more, but that's AoE damage potential instead of single target. There is no counterpart to Poison Injection or Rending Slashes. So in order to help those Magicka builds in terms of single target, we need to give them more single target abilities. And how do we do that? We give them a way better form of a damage over time function in their class skill line, which is Destructive Clench. It costs too much, it does too little damage. Maybe have one morph retain the CC, so you can have that high cost that, hey, this has some utility associated with it. And then the other one is like, it has less cost, but it does more damage, but no longer CCs, no longer has any benefits in that way. So that way you have a DPS utility morph, and then you have a pure utility morph, like crowd control, extra damage functions like immobilization, whatever the fuck it is. But that way you have some discrepancy in, like, PvPers are happy because they still get their CC, and then PvEers are happy because they have a good skill to use. So that's my suggestion. That would bring this staff in a much better place. It still would be kind of iffy because adding 2k direct damage, I'm casting this skill every 8 seconds. So we take that 2000 damage that it's increasing and we divide it by 8, and we're getting 250 DPS from this staff. That's nothing. Remember that Maelstrom staff? We multiply this by 10 and we get 2500. That's how much DPS the Maelstrom staff is giving us. So Maelstrom staff is 10 times better than the Master staff. It's in a really spot. It needs some love, and that does not mean nerf Maelstrom staff, because if you nerf Maelstrom staff, then you just hurt Magicka single target DPS even more. Excuse me. So, yeah, not too much of a good staff in general. The cost reduction does help the ability be more enticing, but it's still not enough. Now we're going to go on to that Asylum Perfected Inferno staff. So now that I'm doing that, I can finally fix my bars into the glorious that they should be. So put Siphoning Attacks back here, and then I get to put Cripple, which is it just every way, shape, and form better than that disgusting Destro Clench skill. I never want to see that on my bar again. And now I'm going to build up Ultimate again to do the final test. So again, with this setup, I did swap over to the Flame enchant with Infuse, because remember, since I'm guaranteed to apply Concussed every 2 seconds already, there's no benefit for me running Charged, because it's going to apply to my Burning and my Concussed. So I'm going to get the best of both worlds while getting a little bit more extra damage out of the Asylum Staff. So in terms of damage potential, when paired with a Maelstrom Staff, obviously, Asylum Staff in this test is going to look the best, because we're gaining this extra damage out of, we're getting the best of both worlds. We're still going to have that fantastic trait in essentiality, or that's not a word, but in essence, a part of the Asylum Staff. The Asylum Staff is pretty much get the charge trait for free every 2 seconds of when using Force Pulse in a row. So that's a really big power spike, because then we get to have 2 traits essentially with this, and then that's going to apply to all elemental types of Burning, Chilled, and Concussed. So we get more freedom in terms of what enchant we want to use. So if we want raw damage, we can go with the Flame Staff to get that extra damage. Now, if we want to take this even further, and we'll lose a little bit of DPS in a target dummy, but we might gain DPS in a raid, is we can use an infused Absorb Magicka enchant. I'm still not happy with where they are in terms of how much DPS loss they give and how much resources they give back in return. It's not an equal playing field. You don't get nearly as much resource management out of it as you do losing DPS, but you can still use that, because since we already have the chance to apply Burning, Chilled, and Concussed with this staff when we're doing Force Pulses, the importance of that Shock or Flame enchant go down in importance, because yeah, the damage is really nice, but a big reason why they're so strong is because extra Concussed or Burning procs. And in today's meta of after Horns of the Reach, when they buff those are 2 insanely powerful status effects. And since we already have them, having that enchant isn't going to bring as much to the table as it would if we didn't have that. So we can have the best of all worlds where we have an infused Absorb Magicka enchant. We'll still get a little bit of damage out of the damage function of it, and then we'll get a tiny little bit of resource management out of it. So it will help out. You'll still get the Burning, you'll still get the Concussed. Your DPS will probably go down, because in terms of flat damage, like the Flame damage is going to out-damage the Absorb Magic, because it has, again, it's going to do more raw damage on the tooltip. I believe it's about like 30 or 40% stronger, and then you will have more chances to apply Burning, because when we're in Execute, we're not using Force Pulse, so that will have a little bit of importance there. So that explains the Asylum Staff. Now let's go through the rotation and see just how good this baby is. Alright, there was the final parse after an excruciating amount of attempts. It is so hard to perfectly do a rotation on a Nightblade. I just want to comment on that. Like, playing a Nightblade to perfection is extremely frustrating. So if you are a Magicka Nightblade out there, or even a Stamina Nightblade, and you're parsing and you're like, why can I go from 39k DPS to 33k DPS doing the same thing? Like, it's because it's so easy to make a mistake. You miss one Spectral Bow, you have to recast one extra time. You are causing so much of a Magicka drain on yourself. You're missing free burst. Like, there are so many things that must go perfectly right with this class in order to get these parses. But whatever, that's talking about Nightblades in a different video. But we finally did it. We got a decent parse with this. So again, the reason I had to do this so many times is because one little mistake throws off your DPS tremendously. And yeah, it's really easy to make a mistake. You miss a weave, you do whatever. So you have to go over again and again and again. And crit RNG does play into it. We'll look at that. But we got 39.2k, and that was with the Asylum Staff. So this is beating the other setup of that charge. So we're getting an additional 1200 DPS. Let's load that fight. So earlier, or let's save that fight. Yeah. So earlier we got that 38k DPS parse. And that was with the Moondancer front bar and the Maelstrom Lightning back bar. And we looked through this pretty decent. We got really lucky with these crits though. Remember, 64, 65, 62, 64 again. So we got really lucky with some of these crits. And then we go to this 39k one, and now let's look through it. So Assassin's Will, 59%, so still good, but not as good as before. Only 48% crit on our light attack, so way less. Still doing really nice DPS, though. Twisting Path about where it should be. Blockade of Storms where it should be. Light attack a little bit stronger than it should be. Crippling Grasp where it should be. Impale where it should be. Fiery Weapon a little bit stronger. Burning, like, this is a really, really average par, so this is good. We have very, very consistent variables with these. Our crit RNG is a little bit strong in some of these, but a little bit under in some other ones. But overall, it's a pretty equalized par, so this is a perfect example of where we should be with this weapon, assuming our rotation goes flawlessly. So a big reason why that is let's look at these debuffs. So with the Asylum staff, we have 85% burning, 57% off balance, and 30% vulnerability. So the vulnerability took a big hit because, again, once I get into execute, I'm not able to keep this up 100% of the time because I'm not using Force Pulse anymore. So my chances to apply vulnerability once I get to 25% go from really high to really, really low because there's no chance for me to apply it because I was using a Flame Enchant. So if I'm doing a solo parse, I could be better off using a Shock Enchant here so that when I'm in execute, I still have that chance to apply off balance and whatnot. But even then, even with losing that tremendous amount of off balance and stuff, we're still winning because that raw damage that this enables. So if we look at the 38k where I had the charged weapon, vulnerability is up 67%, off balance is up 85%, burning 54%. So there is a big, big difference with some of these variables in terms of what's coming from. So in a group, it's going to be ideal to run an Asylum staff for you and your group because you're going to be able to keep up that concuss and off balance at 100% of the time. It also looks really good on pure single target, and it will look really nice too on cleave damage because Force Pulse can split to additional enemies. So that's a really, really big benefit of this weapon. It has really good self or solo DPS, and it also has great group utility. Now, is it the best thing to run on a Magicka Nightblade? Kind of not. So in a group, you'd ideally have this on a sorcerer because they're already running Force Pulse. There's not much of a big detriment because they don't have a spammable in their kit that they can really use. So they use Force Pulse. It does good damage. It has a kind of high cost. I would like to see it lowered or resources come back elsewhere, but it's still their best bet in terms of damage production. So you put this on them. For Nightblade, when we looked at that other parse, remember when I had that Master Staff on, I did more DPS using Funnel Health because I didn't have to heavy attack at all because my resources were easier to manage. I got that 8% max Magicka. So Funnel Health has that really nice benefit of doing really nice raw DPS, and it has a cheaper cost, so less heavy attacking, and it also has that group utility of healing you and an ally so that your healers can focus on healing other people. They can throw out buff up times more. They can help with resources more instead of having to sit there and heal over and over and over again. So it does have that group advantage. So in terms of what is best in slot for, let's say, a Magicka Nightblade, it's really hard to say. And it's been like that since Morrowind, right? Or since Horns of the Reach. Like, a lot of these item sets and traits and enchants have been really, really close to one another. Obviously, in this instance, not so much because they are bringing different things to the table. Like, you're not going to double bar a Maelstrom staff. You're going to only have that on one bar, but it brings a huge power spike. Then we look at the Master Staff, and it's whatever. It doesn't look too hot. Then we look at the Asylum Staff, and it's like, wow, this is great. I can have the best of both worlds where I'm getting concussed, off balance, burning, all these things while being able to run a different trait, while being able to run a different enchant. So there is a lot of closeness in these, but it also is very different when looking at these. But when we look at, like, Julianos compared to Burning Spellweave or Scathing, Scathing's probably not a good idea or a good comparison because it got nerfed to shit. But like Julie to Burning Spellweave, they're very close. One can beat the other in different sort of situations. At other classes, you compare Necropotence to Julie, or Burning Spellweave to Necro. Like, a lot of these things are very close. You compare Grothar to Alambris, they're very close, depending on certain situations. Am I running double Lightning? Meh, I probably don't want to run Alambris, I want to run Grothar. Am I running double Flame? Probably want to run Grothar. Am I running one Flame, one Lightning? Probably Alambris. Am I melee? Am I range? All these different variables change that up. But when we're looking at these, we're seeing a tremendous power spike out of that Asylum staff. Again, is it best in slot? It's really hard to say because the Nightblade especially has that really big benefit of running a cheaper cost ability, etc., etc. It has less group damage utility in terms of enabling performance, but it has better enabling performance through moving pieces. So instead of just giving, hey, here's some free damage, it's like, okay, here's some healing, and then your healer's like, oh, I don't have to heal as much, so now I can focus more on giving damage. So it's not necessarily I'm enabling, it's more like I'm an enabler of the enabler. So it's like a moving puzzle piece in terms of what it's bringing to the table, but it has that utility. It has a different sort of thing that it brings to the table that empowers our group in some sort of way. So it's hard to say. On a Magicka Nightblade, will I be running a perfect Inferno staff? If we can get one. Remember that these can come from other places other than the hard mode Asylum Sanctorum. So that place is going to be really, really hard. Veteran hard mode is going to be brutal. Very few people are going to be able to clear it in its current state. But you can also get it from leaderboards, so doing DSA or VMA or any of the other trials. If it's the weekly, you can get it from there. You can get it from PvP, end of the campaign rewards. So there will be other ways to get this item set. Now, comparing Asylum Perfect to Non-Perfect, Non-Perfect is in a really, really bad spot, primarily only for the Destro staff because of how it works. The every second cast to every third cast, that's a really big difference in terms of how you enable that power. You have to do 3 successive casts in a row versus only 2. So you're saving a global cooldown, you're saving resources, you have a little bit easier to manage rotation, your uptimes are up because you have less cast required, versus like other things like the two-hander. It's like 15 ultimate versus 14 ultimate. That's a very small margin. Or like dual wield where it's like 12 seconds versus 10 seconds. There's a very small gap compared to the Asylum Destro staff compared to the other weapons. So I would like to see a little bit difference in terms of what this brings. So now that we've seen the damage production of all of these, we kind of have an idea. Asylum staff, really, really good, especially if we're in a group. Maelstrom staff, still going to be best in slot. If you're a Magicka DPS looking to pull competitive DPS, you need a Maelstrom staff because it enables way too much. Master staff, still in a really, really shoddy spot. It's not as bad as it was before because that 30% cost increase really helped out Destructive Clench be a little bit more easy to use. But in terms of what this is enabling in terms of raw damage production, 250 DPS, yeah, we're saving resources, which in turn helps our DPS go up as well. But it's still not enough compared to Asylum staff or just a crafted staff in general. I would rather use that than this. So it's still not enough. You can buff the base skill, you can make the staff stronger, you can do a lot of different things. I really think just buffing the base skill in general will help out tremendously, not only making the staff more incentivized, but Magicka DPS in general, because there's a big gap between Stamina and Magicka. And I still think Stamina should do more DPS because they're a little bit harder to play other than Stamina Dragonite. That's brain dead, you're a monkey, whatever. But there's a lot more going on for a Stamina build. You have to keep yourself alive with Blade Cloak. You're reliant on your healers because you don't have this huge damage shield. You're in melee, so you're really susceptible to damage mechanics. There's a lot more risk reward going on with Stamina than with Magicka, but still the gap is really, really big, right? So how do we help that? We give Magicka DPS a little bit more single target. How do we do that? We buff Destructive Clench, a skill that everyone has access to. We could look at other skills that they have access to, making them a little bit stronger. I don't know. There's tons of different options that we could do. Like we could put Minor Force on the Mages Guild Fire Rune. We could buff Fire Rune a little bit because it's doing a little bit less damage than it should be with the damage morph. Like if we compare Scalding Rune, like the damage production of this compared to Trap Beast is just not there. It doesn't have an enabling DPS. It has a really high Magicka cost. So yeah, there's a few suggestions in there. But now let's talk about one thing that I really, really dislike about the Asylum staff, and that is the destruction of diversity. So I'm going to try and keep this short, but a big reason why the Asylum staff is so strong is because it does so much in so little. So remember how in other parses I use charge, the trait, which is normally laughed at. People are like, meh, charge is garbage, why would you ever use this? But now that vulnerability has been introduced from Concussed, and burning has been skyrocketed in terms of damage production, charge is a very good trait, especially for solo application. It's kind of meh in groups where you have, like, let's say 2 Magicka DPS. You can have both of them run infused, and since they're firing more consistently or at a faster rate, that uptime of burning and concussed will go up. But at the same time, charge gives you that guaranteed if you're running force pulse. It's burning and concuss, which you're going to give to the group if they're using wall of fire or whatever it is. It's a very potent enabling trait, and it brings a lot to the table. So it has some sort of niche that it fits in where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe I do want charged, especially like on a healer. A healer with a lightning charged staff with a shot. A shock enchant is really, really strong. That's the end game BIS meta for a healer. You have 1 resto staff and 1 lightning staff, and that lightning staff is charged with a shock enchant, and they, boom, apply concussed. They give off balance with wall of lightning. They're doing a lot. They're getting resources back from elemental drain to proc that every 1 second. It's really, really strong for a healer. So that has that enabling potential. But now with the Maelstrom staff, it's like, why would I ever run charged when I can get the same potency or efficiency out of charge because I'm guaranteed to apply that burning, concussed, and chilled, which what charge's existence is to help those uptimes go up. If I'm guaranteed to do it, then that removes the importance of charge. And then that also allows me to use a different trait, infused, sharpened, Nirntone, whatever it is, precise, and use a different enchant and get different benefits because I'm getting the best of both worlds. So while this is a great staff, and yeah, it's going to be hard to get, but remember there are those easier ways to get it that many people fail to realize, but it's killing diversity. It's killing the one use of charge. It's like, okay, I'm solo, I want to have off balance, maybe I'm a Magicka Dragonite, I want to make sure that I can use my Flame Lash as much as I can. Okay, I use charged. But then we look at the Asylum staff, and it's like, but I can apply this off balance or concussed at 100% uptime if I use Force Pulse. So in terms of where it fits on certain classes, yeah, charged is still going to be good, like on a Magicka Dragonite, because it's like, okay, I have Lash, I'm not going to use Force Pulse, because Force Pulse costs more, it does less damage, I don't get healing out of it, so I'll just stick with charged. I can still use Lash a lot, it's very, very powerful. But then we look at other classes, like the Templar, who doesn't have a ranged spammable that's very strong. Dark Flare is pretty meh, it has a cast time, it's clunky, it doesn't feel good. Sork is already using this. Nightblade, I can choose between Funnel Health or Force Pulse. Each has their advantage. Warden, Force Pulse straight up beats Cliff Racer because it has those chances to apply burning, concussed, extra damage, etc., etc. So in terms of traits for every class except Dragonite, it's like, why ever run charge now when I can just use this staff? So I really don't like that it's removing the importance of charge. I really would like charge to get a little bit something extra, like increases the chance to apply and increases the damage of, or makes status effects enable some special bonus or whatever it is. Probably damage increase of them would be beneficial. But I feel like that would keep charged's importance even throughout this Asylum staff, because it's like, okay, well now the Asylum staff guarantees these things, but charged has a higher chance, and when it does go off, it does more damage, or it enables some fun additional mechanic, or whatever it is, because right now, again, the Asylum staff is completely negating the purpose of the charged trait in terms of a damage dealer. It'll still be decent on healers. It'll still be decent in solo Magicka Dragonite applications. But again, I just really don't like how this is removing so much from the meta instead of adding in this cool new mechanic that it's like, ooh, now I can specialize and maybe I want to use this or maybe I want to use that and combine them together in different ways to make cool group compositions or whatever, instead of just saying, okay, this is better than everything else, let's use that. So that's my 2 cents. Again, hopefully this video has helped give you an idea of where these staves and Magicka DPS kind of in general are fitting in with Clockwork City. They're still very important. Whenever someone says Magicka DPS are dead, everyone runs stamina, I laugh inside, because a big thing that people don't recognize is that Magicka DPS, while they produce less single target DPS than stamina, they are the enablers of the raid. Right now, without Magicka DPS, there is no stamina DPS, because stamina DPS has no way to apply off balance, they have no way to apply concuss without a huge detriment, they have no way to enable these potent augments to the group that buff everyone instead of just themselves. So when you look at that stamina DPS parse and you're like, geez, I wish I could hit that, remember that while you might not be posting the same single target or AoE damage potential that they are, well, you probably should be beating them in AoE, but in terms of single target, when you're comparing, it's like, man, why can I not hit 57k? Just keep in mind, in terms of your raid's group DPS, that 300k or maybe even 400k of that entire group is damage. How much are you enabling? Is it that 10% from off balance? Is it the 8% from concussed? Are you a Dragonite applying flame damage with engulfing flames? What are you bringing to the table that goes above and beyond that single target parse? What are you bringing to the group that makes those numbers happen? So always keep that in mind, that it's not as just simple as looking at a parse and being like, this class is better than that. There's way more going on underneath the table in terms of mechanics, applying buffs, bringing utility via resource management or whatever it is. It's not as simple as who does the most DPS. It's who brings the most DPS to the table. So yeah, while stamina DPS is ahead, Magicka DPS will always have a place in raids due to the importance of off balance, concussed, burning, all these really powerful augments. And always remember that, yeah, you might not pull as much single target DPS as that stamina guy, but you're probably letting him hit those numbers in the first place. Without you, he would be doing way, way less. And you can kind of chalk that up and say, okay, well then I am doing that damage. So yeah, enabling DPS over parse DPS. Always remember that. But yeah, again, hopefully this has given you an idea about where and when not to use these staves, what classes they work a little bit better on, etc., etc. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys around.